at the age of 22 years old, I met a great spiritual teacher.
Pri 22 letih sem odkrila in spoznala velikega duhovnega učitelja.
And I immediately recognized him as the pole star of my life.
In takoj sem ga prepoznala kot severni sij v svojem življenju.
And from that time until now, which has been a considerable number of years, which I won't pin down exactly for you.
In od takrat do zdaj je poteklo mnogo let, ampak točnega podatka vam ne bom izdala.
I have done my very best to make his teachings my own.
Sem se potrudila zelo globoko, da sem njegova učenja sprejela kot svoja.
And just before his passing, which was now 10 years ago,
In ravno preden je umrl, zdaj 10 let nazaj,
he asked me to travel as much as I could.
me je prosil, da potujem, kolikor moram.
He actually suggested I live nowhere, but just travel all the time,
Predlagal mi je, da praktično ne živim nikjer, ampak samo potujem,
which I have not followed that part of the instruction.
kar ga nisem upoštevala.
And it took me a number of years before I really started using my passport as much as I use it now.
In mi je vzelo kar nekaj časa, da sem res začela uporabljati svoj pasoš, tako kot ga zdaj.
But since the last few years, I've had the privilege of speaking to audiences like you, meeting new friends like you.
Ampak v zadnjih letih sem pa res imela privilegij, da govorim pred množicami, kot ste vi, in spoznavam prijatelje, kot ste vi.
To present to you not my own ideas, but the ideas of these great masters.
In ne, da vam predstavljam svoje lastne ideje, ampak ideje teh mojstrov.
As I learned them from Swami Kriyananda, who was the direct disciple of Yogananda, who guided me for 45 years.
Kar sem se naučila od Swamija Kriyanande, ki je bil direktni učenec Paramahanse Yoganande.
No, I can't put that in the present tense. Who guides me for 55 years.
Ne me je vodil, ampak me vodi.
Oh dear, I just gave you the number, didn't I? So
I will
yeah.
not translate that.
Now, my friends, our topic this evening is intuition.
Danes govorimo o intuiciji.
And so the question is, have I prepared this talk, or am I just going to do it intuitively?
In vprašanje seveda je, ali sem se pripravila na to, ali ga bom pač govorila intuitivno.
Probably more the latter, because, meaning the second one, because for me, after those many years of sharing these teachings,
Bolj druga opcija, ker zame po vseh teh letih, ko že delam to,
it's my edge of learning how to speak, my edge of making what I do an expansive experience.
torej moja prednost v tem, kar delam v mojih učenjih in mojih ekspanzivnih učenjih,
Is precisely this topic, which is to just meet people for the first time in this life
je točno ta tema, da spoznam ljudi prvič v življenju
and try to allow a higher sense of understanding to guide my words.
in da poskušam, da se višja realnost, višje spoznavanje vodi moje besede.
Wish me luck.
Zaželite mi srečo.
I think there's a lot of times when we have a difficulty answering a question, it's because the question itself is not clear.
Veliko krat, ko imamo težavo odgovoriti vprašanje, je zato, ker vprašanje ni jasno.
And so if we're asking a question that's a little off from what we really need to know, it's very hard to get a clear answer.
In če sprašujemo vprašanje, ki je čisto malo stran od tega, kar zares želimo vedeti, bomo zelo težko dobili jasen odgovor.
And I think people get a little bit confused about intuition because we don't have a clear idea even of what intuition is.
In mislim, da ljudje zmede to pri intuiciji, da ne vemo sploh točno zares, kaj intuicija je.
And we sort of have this idea that it's just something that just lands on us like a butterfly.
In imamo idejo, kot da je to kar nekaj, kar pristane kot en metulj.
And then just as readily flutters off.
In samo malo odleti stran.
And we just, we don't know how to bring it on at will.
Ne vemo, kako z zavestjo prinesti, uporabiti intuicijo.
So I want to start by getting some clear ideas of at least what I mean when we talk about intuition.
Torej, hočem začeti z eno popolnoma jasno idejo, vsaj tako, kakor jaz razumem intuicijo.
One of the ways that to think about it is it's a unique inner voice.
En način, kako razmišljati o tem, je, da je to unikaten notranji zvok.
Meaning it's something that's prompted from inside of me that doesn't come from other people's opinions.
Je nekaj, kar pride ven iz mene in ne iz drugih.
But one of the difficulties we have is that there's lots of, that me is not a singular entity.
Ampak ena izmed problemov, ki jih imamo, je, da jaz kot jaz nisem samo jaz, ni samo ena entiteta.
We have many different dimensions to ourselves.
Mnogo različnih verzij samega sebe imamo.
So sometimes a person can feel very strongly, this feels right.
Včasih se lahko oseba počuti zelo močno in pravi, to je res, to je prav, kar delam.
And it may feel very right to a certain aspect of who you are.
In mogoče se res počuti, kot da je to zelo prav iz določenega aspekta samega sebe.
So I want to start by saying, I want to talk about what I will call superconscious intuition.
Torej, začenjam s tem, da v tem, kar bom jaz govorila, je superzavestna intuicija.
In a fundamental way, there's three dimensions to our inner awareness.
V osnovnosti imamo 3 dimenzije svojega notranjega zaznavanja.
The one that we live in much too much is what I will call the subconscious dimension.
V tej, v kateri živimo preveč pogosto, je podzavest.
Subconscious has a meaning in psychology, but I want to shift it just a little bit.
Podzavest ima svoj pomen v psihologiji, ampak jaz bom malo drugače to opisala.
Now you have to understand, I'm working from certain premises, which includes the premise of reincarnation.
Jaz delujem iz nekaterih določenih predpostavk in ena iz teh je predpostavka reinkarnacije.
Which was a very strange idea to me, being an American raised in a Jewish family, when I first heard the idea. It was not part of my culture.
Kar je bila zelo čudna ideja zame, ko sem prvič spoznala kot Američanka odraščena v židovski družini.
But something about it felt intuitively right.
Ampak nekaj v tej ideji se mi je zdelo intuitivno pravilno.
And also, for many years, I just did the experiment. If reincarnation were true, how would it apply to the situations I was in?
In mnogo let sem delala eksperimente, kaj če je inkarnacija resnična, kako vpliva na situacije v mojem življenju.
And of course, it's a fundamental teaching for half or 3/4 of the world.
In seveda to je popolnoma osnovno učenje za polovico ali 3/4 sveta.
As one Western philosopher said in favor of reincarnation,
Kot je rekel en zahodni filozof v prid reinkarnacije.
is it any more surprising that we would be born twice than once?
Je kaj bolj presenetljivo, kot da bi se rodili dvakrat, kot samo enkrat.
In the context of what I'm talking about, when I define the subconscious mind, here's how reincarnation plays into it.
V kontekstu, v katerem govorim o podzavesti, tako reinkarnacija govori o temu.
All the experiences that we have in all our incarnations, even though we forget them consciously, they make an imprint on who we are.
Vse izkušnje, ki smo jih imeli v vseh svojih reinkarnacijah, čeprav se jih zavestno ne spomnimo, so pustili vtis na naši podzavesti.
Much more than the physical body that we live in, our real definition is the energy pattern that we carry inside of ourselves.
Mnogo bolj kot samo naše fizično telo je definicija nas energijski vzorec, ki ga nosimo v sebi.
The subject of the chakras, the energy centers that run through the center of the spine, the chakras are the energy pattern.
Čakre, ki potekajo po naši hrbtenici, to so energijski vzorci.
And the physical body is actually created out of physical matter because of the magnetic field generated by the chakras.
Fizično telo je v bistvu zgrajeno iz magnetnega polja, ki ga čakre ustvarjajo.
When the sperm and the ovum come together, Yogananda, Paramhansa Yogananda said that this is the beginning point. The medulla is the beginning point of the human body.
Torej, ko se zgodi, ko se jajčica in semenčica združita, potem v izmedule oblongate nastane telo.
The sperm and the ovum come there, and then in the little pictures of my developing embryo,
In če vidimo majhno sliko, ko se razvija zarodek,
the first thing that happens looks like a matchstick.
prva stvar, ki se dogaja, zgleda kot vžigalica.
I'm smiling at the pregnant lady in the front row.
Smejim se noseči.
And it goes from the top of the spine to the base of the spine. That's what that matchstick is.
In gre od vrha hrbtenice do dna hrbtenice.
And then the energy pattern of the chakras, which is also the repository of the karma of this incarnation.
In energijski vzorec v čakrah, ki je tudi skladišče karme.
And the karma is, why am I born? What am I here to learn?
In karma je, zakaj sem se rodil, zakaj se bom tukaj naučil.
And let's see, so the matchstick creates that, and then the body forms around it.
In telo se naredi okrog te vžigalice, hrbtenice.
Oh, yeah. And what's recorded in the chakras are all the experiences that this individual soul has had up to this point.
In kaj je zapisano v čakrah, so vse izkušnje, ki so bile do zdaj v tem individualcu.
And that's the karma that causes us to reincarnate in Slovenia or El Paso, Texas, or Croatia, or wherever. Oh, all right, so the karma, so everything that's happened. Now, because we don't remember consciously what's happened, that doesn't mean we don't feel inside of us what's happened to us.
In samo ker se ne zavedamo zavestno, kaj se je v nas zgodilo, ne pomeni, da tega ne čutimo globoko v sebi.
I mean, think how many lives end in unresolved disappointment.
Samo pomislite, koliko življenj se konča v nerazrešenih, razočaranih.
Think how many things happen that just never get straightened out.
Koliko stvari se dogaja, ki se nikoli ne razrešijo.
And then people die and move on, and those specific circumstances can never be solved in their own terms.
In ljudje umrejo in se premaknejo naprej in te specifične razmere se nikoli ne morejo razrešiti.
But the unsettled energy that wants a resolution is the karma that carries us into another life.
Ampak ta raztresena energija, ki hoče razrešiti to stvar, je karma, ki se premakne v naslednjo življenje.
And we meet people and things happen to us, and there's a momentum that we just step into.
In spoznamo ljudi in stvari se dogajajo za nas in to je samo en moment, v katerega na to vstopimo ponovno.
Think of love at first sight.
Spomnite se ljubezni na prvi pogled.
Because it's not first sight.
Ker ni prvi pogled.
Think about someone who comes into your life and immediately you wish they hadn't come into your life.
Spomnite se na koga, ki je prišel v vaše življenje in takoj veste, si želite, da ne bi prišel v vaše življenje.
Yogananda says that antipathy is just as powerful a magnet as love.
Yogananda pravi, da antipatičnost je prav tako močen magnet kot ljubezen.
One poor woman I know gave birth to twins, a boy and a girl.
Ena bogo žensko, ki jo poznam, je rodila dvojčke.
The boy was an old friend, the girl was an old enemy.
Njen sin dvojček je bil stari prijatelj in njena hčerka dvojčica je bila stara sovražnica.
That was a tough karma for everybody in the family, as you can imagine.
To je bila težka karma za vse v družini.
So all of that, everything that has already happened is stored in, we call it the subconscious mind, because it's below the conscious level.
Vse, se pravi, vse, kar se je kadarkoli zgodilo, je shranjeno v podzavesti, ker je pod zavestjo.
But just think for a moment, self-evidently, what a powerful force that is.
Ampak samo pomislite, kako močna sila je to.
So we are constantly being compelled to do things that, guess what, feel right, because that subconscious mind is pushing us.
In konstantno počnemo stvari, ki mislimo, da so prave, samo zato, ker nas podzavest poriva tam.
And some of that is exactly what we need, what is helpful to us.
In nekaj tega je res to, kar potrebujemo, kar nam je v pomoč.
because it's karma that has to be resolved, and that's why we were born, to get on with it.
To je karma, ki jo moramo razrešiti in zato smo se rodili, da jo razrešimo.
So you, for example, marry that terrible person one more time.
Zato se, na primer, poročiš za tisto grozno osebo še enkrat.
Or insist on being an artist because I'm never going to be a banker ever again.
Ali vztrajaš pri tem, da boš umetnik, ker bančnik pa ne bom še enkrat.
And some of that is exactly what we're supposed to be doing.
In nekaj od tega je res tisto, kar zares moramo početi.
But that which is familiar often has a hold on us, not because it's good, but merely because it's familiar.
Ampak tisto, kar nam je znano, kar nam je udobno, ima prijem na nas, ne zato, ker je prav, ampak zato, ker je znano.
So depending on how consciously we live, we can sometimes be only compelled through a whole incarnation by subconsciousness.
Tako da zelo odvisno, kako zavestno živimo, in lahko včasih celo življenje preživimo samo pod vplivom podzavesti.
The word momentum is a very important word in this context.
Beseda moment je zelo pomembna beseda v tem
Because if you have
kontekstu.
energy going in a certain direction, it takes more energy to make a turn than it does just to flow with it.
Ker če greš za energijo, je dosti težje narediti ovinek, kot da samo greš z njo.
I was going to visit a friend. I missed the exit on the freeway. I knew where I was trying to go, but I missed the exit.
Hotel sem obiskati prijatelja, bil sem na avtocesti, hotel vzeti izvoz, ampak sem ga sfalil.
And the next exit was closed, and the one after that had construction.
In naslednji izvoz je bil zaprt, naslednji je imel delo na cesti.
And then because I have a terrible sense of direction, I got lost.
In zato, ker imam slabo orientacijo, sem se zgubil.
I knew exactly where I wanted to go, but momentum led me on a wild goose chase.
Točno sem vedel, kam hočem iti, ampak momentum me je peljal na divji lov.
Now, all of this is to say there is subconscious intuition.
Vse to je zato, da vam povem, da imamo podzavestno intuicijo,
Because it's your inner voice,
Ker
and
to-
it's speaking to you from inside.
ker to je naš notranji zvok, ki nam govori nam od znotraj.
But it's not necessarily a voice that is going to expand your awareness.
Ampak ni nujno to zvok, ki ga hočemo poslušati, če hočemo razširiti svoje obzorja.
At the opposite end of subconscious is superconscious.
In na drugi strani tega, podzavesti, na drugi strani je nadzavest.
Superconscious is the part of us that is the funnel leading to greater awareness.
Nadzavest je li, ki nas vodi v večje zavedanje, boljše zavedanje.
Superconscious connects us with the infinite.
Nadzavest nas poveže z neskončnim.
I'm a devotee, I believe in God, I can use that word very easily. It's the higher reality that surrounds us at all times.
Sem privrženka, verjamem v Boga in zame je to neka višja realnost, ki nas obdaja ves čas.
I like to think of God as the Divine Mother,
Jaz želim razmišljati o Bogu kot o božanski materi,
which is actually, and this is another long subject I won't go into tonight,
kar je ponovno ena dolga zgodba, katere ne bom načenjala danes,
which is what Jesus was talking about when he used the word the Comforter.
kar je govoril Jezus, ko je uporabljal besedo.
I mean, what image, pardon me? What image,
Yeah, I didn't know the word, sorry.
oh, we're
Dobrze.
correcting.
Yeah.
What image conveys the ideal of a Divine Mother better than the word comforter?
Kakšna beseda upodablja bolje božansko mater kot beseda tolažnik?
This was one of Yogananda's many contributions to spiritual understanding.
To je bila ena iz Yoganandinih največjih prispevkov k temu razumevanju.
He wasn't arguing against a patriarch. He was trying to explain to us the actual nature of our relationship with this higher reality.
Ni hotel zagovarjati patriarhije, ampak je hotel nekako prispevati k našemu zavedanju više realnosti.
It's a loving, guiding mother.
Je ljubeča, vodeča mati.
And our superconscious, the superconscious dimension of ourselves is what opens us to that kind of guidance.
In nadzavest nad samih nas vodi, da se odpremo k temu višjemu zavedanju.
It's not separate from ourselves, even though we use devotional terms like God and Divine Mother, but it's not separate from my own consciousness.
To ni ločeno od naše lastne zavesti, čeprav lahko uporabljamo besede kot so Bog, Božanska mati, ampak to je ena stvar.
But it's not as fully accessible to me as other parts.
Ampak ni tako polno dostopna meni kot ostali deli.
So from the point of view of personal expansion, superconscious is the way that we really want to go.
Tako da iz vidika osebne razširitve je nadzavest tista, kamor želimo iti.
Because it introduces a greater potential than we have already realized.
Ker nam predstavi višji potencial kot to, kar že imamo do zdaj.
And more profoundly is the doorway to the deepest fulfillment that we're really seeking.
In bolj globoko, to so vrata do tistega najbolj globokega zadoščenja, ki ga iščemo.
But it's also unknown territory. It's not as familiar, it's not as comfortable.
Ampak je pa tudi neznan teritorij, ni znan, ni udoben.
So well, we won't go there yet. The third dimension of consciousness is right in the middle between subconscious and superconscious.
Torej, med podzavestjo in nadzavestjo imamo tretjo dimenzijo,
Which is what we call the conscious mind.
kar kličemo zavestni
And the conscious level is not really a distinct reality in itself.
Zavestni nivo ni v bistvu ločena realnost.
Because we actually swim in a field of energy of all different vibrations.
Ker v bistvu plavamo v polju energij različnih vibracij.
Vibrations that want to keep us small and vibrations that want to help us become greater than we are at the moment.
Vibracije, ki nas ohranjajo majhne, in vibracije, ki nas hočejo razširiti proti temu boljšemu, kar smo zdaj.
And quite literally, both of those forces are pushing on us all the time.
In dobesedno nas obe te sili porivata cel čas.
And the conscious dimension is the battlefield between these two forces.
In zavestna dimenzija je bojišče med tema dvema silama.
In the scripture of India, the Bhagavad Gita, it's set on a battlefield.
V indijski knjigi Bhagavad Gita je to v bistvu ta boj postavljen na bojišče.
And that battlefield is called the field of Kurukshetra.
In to bojišče je poimenovano polje Kurukshetre.
And that's the field between, am I going to stay as I've always been, or am I going to rise to my fuller potential?
In to je polje tega, ali bom ostal, kar sem vedno bil, ali se bom dvignil do mojega resničnega potenciala.
We had a little girl in our school, she was a kindergarten girl.
Imeli smo majhno punčko v naši šoli v vrtcu.
And her name was Sarah, and she was a force to be reckoned with.
Ime je bilo Sara in bila je sila, s katero smo se mogli boriti.
And one day she came to school and she was absolutely impossible.
In en dan je prišla v šolo in je bila popolnoma nemogoča.
And finally her teacher took her aside in private and said, Sarah, what is going on today?
In končno jo je učitelj vzel na stran in jo vprašal, Sara, kaj se dogaja?
Sarah said, well, you know, every day there's an angel on one shoulder and a devil on the other shoulder.
In Sara je rekla, veš, vsak dan imam angela na eni rami in hudiča na drugi rami.
And most days I listen to the angel. Today I'm listening to the devil.
Večino časa sicer poslušam angela, ampak danes sem poslušala hudiča.
Well, out of the mouths of babes, sometimes they just tell us the truth, don't they?
In iz njenih ust včasih nam preprosto povejo resnico.
Now, intuition is also something that we develop progressively. It doesn't just pop on us full grown.
Intuicija je nekaj, kar razvijamo postopoma, ne kar naenkrat pride kot popolnoma razrasla intuicija.
So depending on where you are in this incarnation or depending on what specific karma you're working with.
Odvisno, kakšno specifično karmo trenutno predeluješ.
If your life is compelled by the opinions of others,
Če je tvoje življenje vodeno z strani mnenj ostalih,
And you're unfamiliar even with your own subconscious promptings.
In se ne poznaš niti za lastno podzavestjo.
The first thing you have to do is to listen to yourself.
Prva stvar, katero moraš narediti, je, da poslušaš samega sebe.
I mean, I had a friend who was so much of what they call a people pleaser. Is that an expression here? A people pleaser.
Imela sem prijatelja, ki je bil res človek, ki je samo hotel drugim ustreči.
That she could hardly order her own lunch in a restaurant.
Da niti ni znala naročiti lastnega kosila.
And for her, it was important simply to say what she wanted.
In za njo je bilo zelo pomembno, da se je naučila, kako povedati, kaj si želi.
And it didn't really matter if it was subconscious or superconscious, it just had to be something that related to her.
In niti ni imelo veze, ali je podzavest ali nadzavest, samo nekaj, kar je bilo resnično njeno, je moglo biti.
So having accepted that that's a possibility, I'm going to move forward towards superconscious.
In torej sprejmemo, da je to možnost, ampak jaz bom zdaj premaknila proti nadzavesti.
The greatest obstacle to intuition is that we are so biased in our preferences.
Največja ovira za intuicijo je, da smo zelo pristranski pri naših preferencah.
The way they talk about it in yoga, we have so many likes and dislikes, attachments and aversions.
V jogi govorimo, da imamo toliko stvari, ki jih maramo, toliko, ki jih ne maramo, toliko, na katere smo navezani.
And so many of them are buried in the subconscious and are so familiar, we just think of them as things that are true.
In toliko njih je zakopanih v podzavesti, da preprosto mislimo, da so resnične.
And we don't realize that they are the accumulated ideas of our own experience.
In ne zavedamo se, da so to samo akumulirane vse naše izkušnje,
That may or may not be helpful in the present.
ki nam bodo ali nam ne bodo pomagale v prihodnosti.
I was speaking with friends just yesterday about this.
Včeraj sem se ravno pogovarjala o temu.
Yogananda made a very interesting and very subtle statement.
Yogananda je povedal eno zelo zanimivo in zelo subtilno izjavo.
He said, because we exist in the dimension of time,
Zato, ker obstajamo v dimenziji časa,
and even though we can have theories about the illusion of time, we're still bound by it.
čeprav lahko imamo teorije o iluziji časa, smo še vedno vezani v čas.
And in the aura of time, one thing follows another sequentially.
In v tej auri časa ena stvar sledi drugi, zaporedno.
Yeah, I was in the hotel, somebody picked me up, they brought me here, these things went 1, 2, 3, like that.
Bila sem v hotelu, nekdo me je pobral, prišla sem sem.
And in the realm of our relationships with one another,
Ampak v tej realnosti naših odnosov z ljudmi
we have experiences because you say something to me, I have a reaction and say something back to you.
imamo take izkušnje, da ok, jaz tebi nekaj rečem, ti meni nekaj rečeš nazaj.
You may have said something that annoyed me. And so now I feel annoyed and I speak back to you in an annoyed tone of voice.
In lahko si mi rekel nekaj, kar me je zelo vznemirilo in zdaj bom govorila nazaj s tabo vznemirjeno.
And you didn't like that, so you get madder at me.
In tebi ni bilo všeč in si rato še bolj jezen name.
So Yogananda said the illusion is because one thing follows another in time,
In Yogananda je rekel, da iluzija je zato, da ena stvar sledi drugi v času.
we have the impression that one thing causes another.
Mislimo, da ena stvar povzroči drugo.
That I wasn't upset until you said that to me.
Nisem bila vznemirjena, dokler mi nisi rekel tega.
One dear husband said to his dear wife, everything is fine and then you get upset.
Enkrat je mož rekel svoji ženi, vse je luštno, dokler se
And
ne
she of course
razjeziš.
says everything isn't fine, that's why I got upset.
In potem je ona rekla, ne, nič ni prav, zato sem se razjezila.
And then we're off and running.
In na to se začne.
Okay. But what's actually happening is that a karma within you is ready to face the fact that I get upset about things that happen.
Ampak kaj se v bistvu dogaja, da karma v tebi je pripravljena, da se sooči s to jezo.
And we're just an energy pattern, bear in mind.
In mi smo samo energijski vzorec.
So now is the moment when I get to find out that I'm still capable of getting really upset.
Torej, zdaj je moment, da spoznam, da sem še vedno pripravljena in znam se zelo razjeziti.
So I start broadcasting a signal that says somebody do something that will upset me.
Zato začnem širiti signal, naj nekdo nekaj naredi, da se bom razjezila.
And then my mother or my father or my child or my husband will hear that signal and come in and do something, and I get to be upset.
In nekdo od naših bo prejel ta signal in bo prišel do mene in se lahko razjezim.
They participated in the karma, but they didn't cause it.
Sodelovali so v moji karmi, ampak niso je povzročili.
Because if it wasn't already in me, the whole cycle would have been different.
Ker če ne bi bilo to že v meni, bi bilo pa vse drugače, ta cikel.
Because we are subconscious.
Ker smo podzavestni.
And what makes it more confusing is what we feel subconscious is very real.
In kar naredi to še bolj zmedeno, je, da to, kar čutimo podzavestni, čutimo zelo, zelo resnično.
People will often come to me and say, "Oh, I know it's stupid to feel this way."
Ljudje pogosto pridejo do mene in mi rečejo, vem, da je zelo neumno, da se počutim tako.
I say it's not stupid at all. You've spent incarnations getting this confused.
Pravim jim, ne, to sploh ni neumno. Preživel si inkarnacije celotne, da si tako zmeden.
It's just most likely not caused by what you think it's caused.
Samo najverjetneje ne povzroča tista stvar tega, kar ti misliš, da jo povzroča.
So unfortunately, a lot of times when people think they're being intuitive in a superconscious way,
Nažalost, velikokrat, ko ljudje mislijo, da so intuitivni z nadzavestjo,
we're just actually being compelled by all these unresolved energies.
nas v bistvu samo te naše nerazrešene energije vodijo.
So you cannot separate true intuition from the rest of your life.
In ne moreš razrešiti resnične intuicije od ostalega tvojega življenja.
If you really want to hear the guidance for where you're trying to go,
Če želiš slišati vodenje, kam moraš iti,
we have to become very aware of where I am right now.
moramo postati zelo zavedni, kje smo trenutno.
Self-honesty, introspection, humility, high ideals,
Introspekcija, visoki ideali, ponižnost.
and how much on an everyday basis we examine our responses.
In koliko na vsakodnevni ravni preštudiramo naše odzive na stvari.
There's this very simple phrase, the unexamined life.
Zelo preprosta fraza je sorry.
And this is, pardon me, did you finish?
Yeah, no, sorry, I got caught up. Sorry, go ahead.
The,
Neexamirano življenje, neraziskano življenje. Okay.
Thank you. The majority of people in the world just allow the energy to run, incarnation after incarnation.
Večina ljudi na svetu samo pusti, da energija teče inkarnacijo za inkarnacijo.
And eventually, we either get terribly bored or we suffer so much that we're willing to think in a different way.
In sčasoma ali se popolnoma zdolgočasimo, ali pa nismo več pripravljeni, ali pa res tako trpimo, da ne moremo več drugače.
And one of the difficulties with hearing superconscious intuition,
Nekaj težav z nadzavestno intuicijo
it's very subtle.
je, da je zelo subtilna.
And by its very nature, it's fluid.
In po svoji naravi je zelo dinamična, zelo tekoča.
Because it's very responsive to the energy as it is.
Ker je zelo odzivna na energijo, kot je.
So we have to have a level of stillness within ourselves to be able to feel that more subtle vibration.
Zato moramo v sebi imeti nek nivo mera, da lahko začutimo to subtilno energijo.
Where the subconscious is often shouting.
Podzavest pa preprosto kriči.
The subconscious says, I want.
Hočem.
or it says, no, please, not that.
Ne to, prosim.
Because it wants to perpetuate itself.
Ker samo hoče se ponavljati.
And the superconscious here is just very subtly whispering, but here's where your happiness lies.
Nadzavest pa samo preprosto nam šepeta, evo, to je, kaj rabiš res narediti.
What we also have to understand is that superconscious intuition shifts as our consciousness shifts.
Kar pa moramo razumeti je, da nadzavestna intuicija se spremeni, ko se naša zavest spremeni.
What I mean by that is often when we have true intuitive guidance,
Pogosto, ko imamo resnično intuitivno vodenje,
we get so excited about it
smo tako navdušeni,
that we just grab it and hold it like this.
da jo zagrabimo in se je držimo.
And instead of treating it like the very sensitive guest that it is,
In namesto, da bi z njo ravnali kot zelo občutljivim gostom, kakršen je,
we make it rigid and fixed.
jo naredimo trdno in nepremakljivo.
This is what I'm supposed to do.
To je to, kar moram delati.
And that voice gets louder and louder. This is what I'm supposed to do.
In ta glas postaja vse glasnejši.
And over here it says, for a day or two, and then we're going to do something else.
In ponovno ta glas potiho pa pravi, ja, za en dan ali dva, potem pa drugače.
I myself, when I was involved in a big project once,
Ko sem bila enkrat vključena v velik projekt,
or I should put it differently, one of the big projects I was involved in at one time, was we had to make a decision. And there were about 6 or 7 strong-minded people involved.
morali smo se odločiti in imeli smo 7 ali 8 zelo močnih ljudi.
And because I have been practicing superconscious intuition for a long time,
In ker sem takrat že prakticirala nadzavestno intuicijo nekaj časa,
I could recognize the vibration when it comes.
sem prepoznala vibracijo, ko je prišla.
And I suddenly knew exactly what we should do.
In takoj sem vedela, kaj bi morali narediti.
So I wrote everybody and told them what we should do,
In sem vsem napisala, kaj moramo narediti,
which was not a very superconsciously intuitive thing for me to have done.
kar ni zelo nadzavestno intuitivno odločitev.
It was a very subconscious thing for me to have done.
Bila je zelo podzavestna stvar, ki sem jo naredila.
I have decided, and now I'll tell you.
Jaz sem se odločila in zdaj vam bom povedala, kako bomo naredili.
And it was received, as you might expect, not very well.
Ja. In ni bilo sprejeto dobro.
And there was a big hoo-ha about, mostly about the way I said it, not what I said, which was stupid on my part.
In bilo je veliko odzivov na to, kako sem jim to povedala, ne kaj sem jim povedala.
And things just rolled down here and got worse and worse after that.
In stvari so se samo odvalile v dolino tam naprej in vse poslabšale.
Until I realized what had happened.
Dokler sem se zavedala, kaj sem naredila,
Superconscious intuition entered the battlefield of consciousness,
nadzavestna intuicija je vstopila na bojišče zavesti
and then subconscious energy ate the intuition,
in podzavestna energija je na to pojedla intuicijo
and from then on it was spoiled.
in od tam naprej je bila pokvarjena.
Because it wasn't me having faith in a higher wisdom that we could all share.
Ker to ni bilo, da sem jaz imela zavest v višjo modrost,
It was me asserting that, look, I'm right one more time.
ampak je bilo samo to, da sem jim močno povedala, jaz imam prav.
So that was a very good lesson for me.
In to je bila zelo pomembna lekcija zame.
Just to tell you what finally happened, I had to write a letter of apology, which I did very easily.
Na to sem morala napisati opravičilno pismo
And I said, I felt that I had a true intuition, but I can see now that the way I presented it has muddied the water to such an extent
in napisala sem, mislila sem, da sem imela zares močno intuicijo, ampak tako kot sem to radila, sem tako umazala vodo,
that I totally leave the discussion to you all and you make the decision.
da vam popolnoma prepustim to diskusijo in napravite odločitev.
And I have to say, in the end, they decided exactly what I knew we should do.
Ampak vseeno na koncu so se odločili tako, kot sem rekla.
But I really learned a lot from that.
Ampak sem se res veliko naučila iz tega.
If you really have faith in intuition, you don't have to use power like that to
In
get
če-
what you want.
In če res verjameš in imaš intuicijo, ne rabiš uporabiti moči na tak način.
You see many, many subtle things.
Res vidiš veliko subtilnih stvari.
Another thing we really have to understand about intuition is that intuition is not prophecy.
In še ena stvar, ki jo moramo razumeti glede intuicije, je, da intuicija ni prerogba.
Sometimes when we have an intuitive feeling about something, we think that that is a divine declaration that this is what's going to happen.
Včasih, ko imamo intuitivni občutek glede nečesa, mislimo, da je to božanska deklaracija, da se bo to res zgodilo.
And we become, that's how the ego gets involved.
In tako se ego vmeša v stvar.
And that's how we begin to lose our judgment because we have drawn a conclusion that may not be true.
In tako izgubimo to razsodbo, ker smo prišli do nekega zaključka, ki mogoče ni resničen.
So this is what I was saying about intuition itself is a flow of energy. It's not a fixed reality.
Torej, tako kot sem govorila, intuicija je pretočna energija, to ni fiksna realnost.
And a lot of times we have intuitions that are true in the sense that we have really received a possibility from the divine.
In včasih imamo intuicije, ki so res resnične, kar v pomenu, da smo dobili intuicijo od božanskega.
But we might not have the magnetism ourselves, or the karma of everyone is not going to cooperate with that intuition.
Ampak nimamo sami tega magnetizma ali karme, od ostalih ne bodo sodelovali s to intuicijo.
And that's where a degree of personal calmness is really important in order to be able to work well with our intuition.
In zato je res pomemben nivo notranjega miru, da lahko delamo s to intuicijo.
The other thing we have to understand is that heart and intelligence are two sides of the same coin.
Srce in inteligenca sta dve strani istega kovanca.
And too often people think that intuition is the heart's feeling and the mind just doesn't play a part.
In pogosto ljudje mislijo, da intuicija je občutek srca, ampak se pač ne strinja s tem, dela po svoje.
That's why I like the word intelligence.
Zato imam rada besedo inteligenca.
Because it's not really mind and heart, it's heart and intelligence.
Ker ni v bistvu in srce, ampak srce in inteligenca.
And we also have to understand that something that's going to manifest in this world or be expressed in any way in this world,
In moramo vedeti, da vse, kar se manifestira na tem svetu,
eventually is going to have a component of reason to it.
se bo slej ko prej moralo imeti neko komponento razuma.
So people often think that the more irrational an idea is, the more it proves that it's intuitive.
In ljudje pogosto mislijo, da bolj kot je neka ideja iracionalna, bolj je intuitivna.
Intuition can transcend reason
Intuicija lahko gre čez razum,
in the sense that there's no logical bridge, I just know it's true.
v smislu, da ne morem si logično razložiti, ampak vem, da je res.
The kind of logic that works against intuition is like this.
Logika, ki deluje proti intuiciji, je taka.
When it's always just a matter of how many yeses, how many no's, how many positive, how many negative.
Vedno gledamo samo koliko jajev, koliko ne, koliko pozitivnih, koliko negativnih, plus, minus.
When we think the only way to arrive at a true conclusion is just to put all the facts on the table.
Ko mislimo, da edini način, da pridemo do pravega zaključka, je, da damo vse dejstva na mizo.
And that's when the mind can become the enemy of intuition.
In takrat lahko postane sovražnik intuicije.
I heard an interview on the radio with a scientist.
Poslušala sem intervju na radiju z znanstvenikom.
And the details are not clear, but I think this was what he had done.
Detajli mi niso jasni, ampak to mislim, da je bilo tako.
He was the one who did some enormous project with tracking human DNA.
Naredil je en gromozanski projekt za sledenjem DNA-ja, genetike.
And he started the project because he intuitively knew it could be done.
Začel je projekt, ker je intuitivno vedel, da se ga da narediti.
And no one had ever done it before, so all his peers told him, oh, you can't do that.
In noben ga ni še nikoli naredil, torej vsi so mu rekli, da se tega ne da narediti.
And they had all the reasons why it couldn't be done,
In so mu našteli vse razloge, zakaj ne.
which were all subconscious reasons, saying it had never been done before, therefore it can't ever be done again in the
Kar so
future.
bili vsi podzavestni razlogi, ker se še nikoli ni zgodilo, so ne more nikoli zgoditi.
And the interviewer said, how did you feel when they all said that to you?
In intervjuer ga je vprašal, in kako si se počutil, ko so ti to rekli.
He said, it didn't bother me at all because I knew I could do it.
Rekel je, ni imelo veze, ker sem vedel, da lahko naredim.
And he didn't have to fight against them because he just knew he could do it.
Ni se rabil boriti proti njim, ker je preprosto vedel, da bo naredil to.
But he then applied his enormous scientific training and to actually accomplish it, what he knew could be done.
Ampak na to je pa uporabil vso svojo znanstveno izobrazbo, da je naredil to, kar je vedel, da se lahko naredi.
So what I mean about intuition not being prophecy is this.
In s tem, ko rečem, da intuicija ni prerogba,
Because over many years I have done many hours of personal counseling with people,
čez leta sem naredila veliko osebnega svetovanja ljudem.
I've been able to watch these things play out in by now hundreds of people's lives.
In gledala, kako se te stvari odvijajo v stotinah ljudi.
And often someone will come to me, and for some reason this is what it usually is. Intuitively I feel I'm supposed to be a healer.
In pogosto bodo ljudje prišli k meni in rekli, recimo, intuitivno vem, da bom zdravilec.
And I say, what kind of healing are you interested in?
In ga vprašam, kakšno zdravljenje pa te zanima?
Well, I feel I'm supposed to be a healer.
Čutim, da bom zdravilec.
Well, do you want to help children? Do you want to help mentally ill people? Well, I feel I'm supposed to be a healer.
Hočeš pomagati otrokom, hočeš pomagati duševno za ostalim? Ne, mislim, da bom zdravilec.
Have you apprenticed yourself to someone? Are you training? I feel I'm supposed to be a healer.
Si se že komu pridružil, te kdo trenira? Ne, jaz vem, da bom zdravilec.
And then, unfortunately, nothing ever happens because of that.
In nikoli se nič ne zgodi zaradi tega.
Because we don't understand how the heart has to work with the intelligence to make that initial intuition more than just something that just passes through.
Ker moramo razumeti, da mora srce sodelovati z inteligenco in narediti nekaj iz te prvotne intuicije.
Swami Kriyananda, I have to say, was the most intelligent person that I have ever met.
Swami Kriyananda je bil najbolj inteligentna oseba, ki sem jo kadarkoli spoznala.
And he could always solve problems in a way that none of us, we were a pretty bright group of people.
Bili smo zelo precej pametna skupina ljudi.
But sometimes we'd just be stumped. We just couldn't figure out how to solve a situation.
Ampak včasih smo se preprosto nekaj ustavili, zataknili, nismo znali rešiti situacije.
And we'd present the issue to Swamiji and he'd just go right to the heart of it.
In smo predstavili ta problem Swamiju in je prišel takoj do središča njega.
And I like intelligence, I always have.
Rada imam inteligenco, vedno sem.
It's kind of my hobby.
To je moj hobi.
In the great divine scheme, it doesn't mean anything, but it entertains me.
V veliki božanski schemi ne pomeni nič, ampak mene zabava.
But Swamiji's intelligence was another order of magnitude.
Ampak Swami inteligenca je bila nekaj povsem drugega.
And I knew him from when he was in his early 40s.
Poznala sem ga, odkar je bil v svojih zgodnjih 40-ih.
And by his 80s, when some of you may have met him, he was, of course, his body had changed radically.
In do dobe, v kateri je mogoče kdo od vas ga spoznal, se je njegovo telo mnogo spremenilo.
But in his 40s especially had this characteristic posture.
Ampak vedno je imel to karakterno svojo značilno pozo.
And I don't have the physique that he had, so I can't quite show it to you exactly.
In jaz nimam fizikalnosti kot on, da bi lahko vam pokazala to.
It was always a very straight spine.
Vedno zelo zravnana hrbtenica.
And he wasn't a heavy-set man, but there was a curve in the front.
Ampak ni bil zelo mišičast moški, ampak je imel...
There wasn't a belly, it was just a curve.
Ja, ni imel trebuška, ampak samo
And in
Krivulji.
the Mahabharata, the Mahabharata, which is the epic from which the Gita comes,
Mahabharata je ep, iz katere pride Bhagavad Gita.
the hero has a bow. A bow and
He-
arrow is his skill.
Heroj ima lok in puščice.
And the bow represents many things.
In lok predstavlja mnogo stvari.
And when in the epic, when Arjuna loses heart and thinks he can't go on with the battle,
In v tem epu, ko Arjuna zgubi voljo in misli, da ne bo šel več naprej,
and Krishna has to talk him back onto the field,
ga mora Krišna pregovoriti nazaj na bojišče,
which is the Mahabharata, which is the Gita, the Bhagavad Gita.
kar je na to zgodba Gite.
Arjuna's depression is described as he unstrung his bow.
Arjunova depresija je to, kar opisujejo, da je dal stran iz svojega loka to struno.
And when you meditate, you have the spine straight.
Ko meditiraš, moraš imeti izravnano hrbtenico.
And the spine is the string and the bow is the front.
In hrbtenica je ta struna in prednjo telo je lok.
So when you unstring the bow, the front flattens and the string collapses.
In ko daš to vrv stran iz loka, potem se kolapsiraš.
So that was to say that Arjuna stopped meditating. That's what the image is. He lost his inner connection.
In to je pomenilo v epu, da je Arjuna nehal meditirati, izgubil povezanost, notranjo svojo povezanost.
So when I was contemplating Swamiji's consciousness and I saw his body was the strung bow,
In ko sem razmišljala o Swamijevi zavesti in ko sem videla njegovo telo kot lok,
I saw a factor about that, which is he led with his heart.
v temu sem videla to, da je vodil s srcem.
When he moved forward, his heart was really in the front.
Ko se je premikal naprej, je bilo resnično njegovo srce v ospredju.
Now, for all of us, the heart is in the same physical location,
Za nas je tudi srce na isti lokaciji kot njegovo.
and the heart chakra is in the same place.
In srčna čakra je na isti točki.
But not all of us lead with the heart,
Ampak ne vsi vodimo s srcem.
you know, just in all these different ways.
Smo v drugih pozicijah, čudnih.
Or my habit is wanting to get my brain out in front.
Moja navada je, da hočem voditi z možgani.
You know, just pushing at life with my brain like that.
Porivati življenje z možgani.
As opposed to tightening the bowstring and letting the curve go forward.
Namesto tega, da napnem lok in pustim srce naprej.
And because I came to know Swamiji very well,
In ker sem Swamija zelo dobro poznala,
I realized that the clarity of his intelligence was because he had no fear in his heart.
sem spoznala, da je jasnost v njegovi inteligenci zaradi tega, ker ni imel nobenega straha v srcu.
He had a single value.
Imel je eno in edino vrednoto.
He wanted to live by what was true.
Hotel je živeti tako, kot kar je bilo resnično.
And I don't mean what was factual.
In ne, kar je resnično po dejstvih.
Facts are different than truth.
Dejstva so različna od resnice.
I mean, a person who's dying looks really terrible sometimes.
Oseba, ki umira, včasih izgleda zelo slabo.
So the fact is, the body's going to just go away.
Dejstvo je, da bo telo šlo stran.
But the truth is, death is an illusion, and they could be soaring in spirit even as the body is crashing.
Ampak resnica je, da je smrt iluzija in da so lahko veseli v svojem duhu, čeprav se telo umira.
So do they look terrible, or do they look on the edge of great freedom?
Ali izgledajo grozno, ali so na robu velike svobode.
Facts, truth, depends on your perspective.
Resnica, dejstvo, odvisno od tvoje perspektive.
And the truth for Swami Kriyananda also was to follow his guru's will.
Resnica za Swamija Kriyanando je bilo tudi, da je sledil svojemu guruju, volji guruja.
Whatever Paramhansa Yogananda wanted of him, that was the only thing he wanted.
Karkoli je Yogananda želel od njega, to je bilo vse, kar je on želel.
I remember once we were in some terrible, chaotic situation in the development of Ananda.
Enkrat med razvojem, med gradnjo Anande smo bili v grozni situaciji.
The specifics of it escaped me because we had so many cycles like that.
Specifika te mi uide, se ne spomnim več, ker je bilo veliko takih.
And Swamiji often worked out the karma, our karma as devotees, and the karma of Ananda on his own physical body.
In Swami je pogosto našo karmo njegovih učencev in karmo Anande predelal v lastnem telesu.
So he'd also been having dramatic health things.
Zato je tudi imel dramatične telesne bolezni.
On more than one occasion, his medical records literally would be sent to specialists all over the world because he was such an interesting case.
Ne samo enkrat so pošiljali njegov zdravstveni karton po svetu, ker je bil tako zanimiv primer.
Because his karma didn't make any sense because it wasn't his karma. It was the karma of so many other forces.
Njegova karma ni imela smisla, ker pač ni bila njegova karma, ampak toliko drugih karm v tej.
But during that period of time, he went and had his teeth checked at the dentist.
In enkrat med tem je šel k zobozdravniku.
And he came home and he didn't have any new cavities.
In je prišel domov in ni imel nobenih novih gnilob.
And I often made jokes when I shouldn't.
In pogosto sem se hecala, ko se ne bi smela.
I don't know if this is an expression here or not, but I said, well, thank the Lord for little favors.
Ja, zahvali se Bogu za male usluge.
It was just stupid, not very funny thing to say.
Ne zelo smešno.
Swami got totally serious, totally.
Swami je takoj ratal zelo resen.
Which is something I was used to him doing. I would say something and then suddenly the whole energy would go somewhere else.
Kar se je pogosto dogajalo.
And with absolute conviction, he said, I thank Divine Mother for everything.
In s popolnim prepričanjem mi je povedal, zahvalim se Božanske materi za vse.
I mean, my world is divided up into what I want and what I don't want.
Moj svet je bil razdeljen v to, kar hočem in to, kar nočem.
What pleases me and deeply what I'm afraid of.
Kar mi je dobro ali česar se bojim.
His world was one world.
Njegov svet je bil en svet.
What Divine Mother sends me, I accept with love and gratitude.
Kar mi pošlje Božanska mati, sprejemam za ljubeznijo in hvaležnostjo.
As a consequence, his intelligence was unencumbered by likes and dislikes, desires and aversions.
Kot posledica njegova inteligenca ni bila vplivana z tem, kar je maral, kar ni maral.
It was just a clear screen, so whatever was needed, it just came onto the screen.
Samo jasen ekran je bil. Vse, kar je rabil, je prišlo na ekran.
I had my only excuse on this is I was really just a couple of years onto the spiritual path when this happened.
Moj izgovor za to prihodnost, za tole zgodbo je, da sem bila šele nova na spiritualni poti.
I was caught up in a personal karmic situation that was very, very dramatic.
Ujeta sem bila v zgodbi moje osebnostne karme, v eni, ki je bila zelo dramatična.
Perhaps more accurately, as I was very dramatic.
Če bolj natančno je, jaz sem bila zelo
It
dramatična.
was just, my screen was not clear.
Moj ekran ni bil jasen.
And I was constantly trying to understand, what does God want of me?
In nenehno sem želela razumeti, kaj Bog hoče od mene.
Which is another way to speak about intuition. What is my superconscious trying to guide me to?
Kar je še en drug način, kako govoriti o intuiciji, je, kaj moja nadzavest hoče od mene.
And at that time, our community was very small, and it was easy to have access to Swamiji.
Naša skupnost takrat je bila zelo majhna in je zelo pogosto smo se srečavali s Swamijem.
So I went to his house to talk to him. Just the two of us were there.
In sem šla do njegove hiše, da bi se pogovorila.
And he was sitting in a sort of an armchair with a matching footstool in front of it.
Sedel je na takem fotelju z naslanjačem.
And I sat down in front of the footstool, and he was talking to me over it.
In usedla sem se pred tem.
It was a big hassock like this.
Yeah.
And I was telling him my whole story.
Pripovedovala sem mu svojo celotno zgodbo.
And I was telling him how I just kept praying, but God didn't answer me.
In kako molim in Bog mi ne odgovori.
And suddenly it was just all too much, and I dropped my head onto the hassock like this. And then I was crying. I cried really easily then. Cried, like this.
In kar naenkrat sem samo padla, vse je bilo preveč in sem jokala.
And then I mastered myself enough to lift my face and say, it's so hard to know what God wants. Then I put my head down again to cry.
Jaz sem
like
se
that.
opogumila, se dvignila in rekla, tako težko je verjeti, kaj Bog hoče.
Swami was kind, but he said, no, it isn't.
Swami je bil prijazen, ampak je rekel, ne, ni.
And then, that was like the end of the conversation.
In to je bil konec pogovora.
I don't know whether he changed the subject or went into silence. I no longer remember, but it was over.
Konec pogovora.
And I lived about 5 minutes away, and I left. And I always had this issue with Swamiji from the very beginning.
In živela sem 5 minut stran, sem odšla in takrat sem imela s Swamijem to težavo,
I had so much intuitive trust in him,
da sem imela toliko intuitivnega zaupanja v njega,
in his fairness, in the unconditional nature of his love, in his wisdom.
v njegovo poštenost, v njegovo ljubezen, v njegovo modrost.
But I had a fairly high opinion of myself, too.
Ampak sem imela tudi zelo visoko mnenje sama o sebi.
A little too high, I
Malo
learned over
previsoko.
time. So I couldn't accept things unquestioningly.
In nisem mogla sprejeti zadev brez vprašanja.
Swami Kriyananda described himself with Yogananda in a similar way.
In Swami Kriyananda je opisal samega sebe, ko je bil z Yoganando.
He said, I believed Master unhesitatingly, but not unquestioningly.
Verjel sem mojstru res sem mu verjel, ampak ne brez vprašanja.
So I'm walking up the hill to where my little house was.
In nato sem hodila nazaj proti svoji hiši.
And the way the subconscious works, I was just minutes away from hearing him.
In tako podzavest deluje. Bila sem samo minute stran od tega, ko sem ga slišala.
But I changed what he said in memory.
Ampak sem že spremenila v svojem spominu, kaj je rekel.
I said, it isn't hard to know what God wants. Swami said, no, it isn't. It's hard to know what God wants. Swami said, no, it isn't.
Rekla sem, težko je vedeti, kaj Bog hoče. Swami je rekel, ne, ni.
I added a part. I thought he said, it's not hard for me, Kriyananda, to know.
Ampak v svoji glavi sem že dodala en del, da je rekel, ne, zame ni težko.
Which gave me perfect justification to be really annoyed.
Kar mi je dalo popolno razlago, da sem bila res vznemirjena.
Well, of course, it's easy for him to know. The problem is that it's hard for me to know. Why is he only talking about himself? Why isn't he worried about me?
Seveda, da je lahko za njega, ampak je težko zame. Zakaj govori samo o sebi?
It wasn't funny at the time.
Ni bilo smešno takrat.
I get to my little house. I go into my little meditation space.
Šla sem domov v svoj meditacijski prostor
And I try to meditate.
in poskusila meditirati.
And then all of a sudden, I hear what he really said.
Kar naenkrat sem slišala, kaj je res rekel.
He wasn't talking about himself. He was just saying, it's not hard to know what God wants.
Ni govoril o sebi, govoril je v splošnem.
Which is the same as saying it's not hard to get superconscious insight, intuition into things.
In kar je enako, kot pravimo, da ni težko dobiti nadzavestne intuicije.
So thank God I'm honest.
Hvala Bogu sem bila poštena.
And all of a sudden it was like, well, and I started having this internal conversation with Swamiji.
In kar naenkrat sem se začela notranje pogovarjati s Swamijem.
I said, well, sir, it's really hard for me to know.
In sem mu rekla, zelo težko je zame vedeti.
If it's easy, why is it so hard for me?
Če je lahko, zakaj je tako težko zame?
And his internal answer, which I know that these are true conversations.
In njegov notranji odgovor, kar vem, da je bila resnični pogovor,
He said, because you don't want to know.
je rekel, ker nočeš vedeti.
And I tried to say, yes, I do, yes, I do.
In hotela sem želeti, ja hočem.
But that didn't go very far.
Ampak to ni šlo daleč.
I said, why don't I want to know?
Rekla sem, zakaj nočem vedeti.
He said, because you're afraid.
Rekel je, ker te je strah.
Spoken very sympathetically.
Zelo prijetno mi je povedal.
A true teacher is a divine mother.
Resnični učitelj je božanska mati.
Swamiji said when he was with Yogananda, even when Yogananda would scold you very strongly, which he sometimes had to do.
Swami je rekel, da tudi ko je Yogananda, ko se je zelo jezil nate, kar je včasih delal.
no matter how wrong you were, he said, you always felt encouraged by being scolded.
Kolikor napačno si delal, vedno te je opogumil, da je to prav.
Because the Guru, Divine Mother, they're on our side.
Zato ker guru, božanska mati, oni so na naši strani.
He said, whenever you feel discouraged, Satan is talking to you, not Divine Mother.
Kadar nisi opogumljen, da nekaj narediš, se Satan pogovarja s tabo, ne božanska mati.
So I could hear Swami say, well, because you're afraid.
In Swami mi je rekel, zato ker te je strah.
And I felt unafraid of being afraid.
Ampak počutila sem se, da me ni strah.
And then I said, well, what am I afraid of?
In na to sem ga vprašala, česa pa me je strah?
And I think I figured this out. I don't think he had to tell me, because I know what's right here, and I don't like it.
Zato, ker to sem preprosto začutila, potem mi ni celo odgovoril, ampak vem, kaj je prav tukaj in mi ni všeč. Vem, kaj je resnica.
It was as simple as that. I didn't want it. I didn't want that answer.
Tako preprosto je bilo, nisem želela tega odgovora.
But I wanted to be a good devotee.
Ampak hotela sem biti dober privrženec.
So I created this little side drama over here of trying so hard to know and not knowing, and trying hard to know and not knowing.
In sem si ustvarila to neko stransko dramo,
Because it was right in front of me and I didn't want it.
ker je bilo to direktno pred mano, ampak si nisem hotela tega slišati.
To get true intuition, we have to actually want it.
Da dobimo pravo intuicijo, si jo moramo zares želeti.
And I learned from that experience what I followed ever since.
In iz tega sem se naučila nekaj, kar sem sledila temu od vse od takrat.
Whenever I feel confused and can't seem to get an answer,
Kadarkoli sem zmedena in ne dobim odgovora,
I always ask, why is it hard for me to know?
vprašam, zakaj je težko to zame vedeti.
Because often non-intuition is because you're asking the wrong question.
Ker pogosto je neintuicija je zato, ker sprašuješ napačno vprašanje.
And also we have to understand that many, I'll shift it this way. This woman had gotten involved in a relationship with a man.
Ena ženska je bila v razmerju z moškim
And they weren't getting along very well at all.
in nista se razumela.
I think there was a different couple and I said to Swami, I think it's a good marriage. I think they're evenly matched.
In Swamiju sem rekla, mislim, da je to kar dobra poroka, da sta dobro uravnotežena.
He said, do you think they're well matched? No, sir. I said, they're evenly matched.
Mislim, da nista dobro, ampak sta enakovredno.
So this woman and this man, they were evenly matched.
Ja, sta bila enakovredna.
I think the proportion of delusion and wisdom was just balanced.
Proporcija njune iluzije in modrosti je bilo uravnovešeno.
So they didn't get along, but she was very nervous that he was the one.
Nista se dobro razumela, ampak ona si je nekako mislila, da je bilo strah, da je on tisti.
So she came to ask Swami if in fact he was the one,
In prišla je vprašati Swami, če je on res tisti za njo.
which was not something he was going to buy into, period.
In to ni nekaj, kar bi Swami kupil in ni.
So he tried to just help her in some way or another.
In je poskusil malo drugače pomagati.
After she left, he said to me,
Ko je odšla, mi je rekel,
she has so much to learn, she could learn it with any number of people.
ima se še toliko naučiti, da nima veze s komorkoli se lahko to
He
nauči.
said you have to be very, very spiritually advanced before your karma becomes so singular.
Moraš biti zelo duševno napreden, ko tvoja karma postane tako ozka.
So often also what blocks our intuition is we falsely think that there's only one possible answer.
Včasih tudi tisto, kar blokira našo intuicijo, je, ko mislimo, da je samo en možen odgovor.
And we ask the wrong question.
In sprašujemo napačno vprašanje.
We ask the question, should I study this in college? Should I take this job? Should I buy that house?
Sprašujemo, ali hočem to študirati, ali hočem imeti to službo, hočem kupiti tisto hišo.
And in our lives, those decisions look really big.
In v našem življenju te odločitve izgledajo res velike.
But from the divine perspective,
Ampak
There-
z božanske perspektive,
from the superconscious perspective, those choices don't matter nearly as much as we think they do.
z nadzavestne perspektive, te odločitve nimajo toliko veze, kot mislijo, da imamo.
Because it's not what God is concerned about.
To ni tisto, s čimer je Bog se ukvarja.
He wants us to love, to
Želi,
serve,
da ljubimo,
to be instruments of the light,
da smo inštrumenti svetlobe,
to discover the unconditional love of God within us.
da odkrijemo nepogojno ljubezen Boga v
So-
nas.
We seek a superconscious answer to a subconscious question.
Želimo nadzavestno vprašanje na nadzavestni odgovor na podzavestno vprašanje.
So we have to ask superconscious questions.
Zato moramo spraševati nadzavestna vprašanja.
How can I serve? How can I love?
Kako lahko služim, kako lahko ljubim,
How can I be your instrument in this world?
kako sem lahko inštrument v tem svetu.
I was making what appeared to me to be a very important decision in my life.
Takrat sem sprejemala vsaj to, kar se je meni zdelo, da je bila pomembna odločitev.
I was pretty insecure about it.
Bila sem zelo nesamozavestna glede nje.
And I said, "Sir, is this a good thing or a bad thing? I'm
Jaz sem
thinking of doing."
spraševala, Gospod, je to prava ali slaba?
Swami went, "It's just a thing."
Swami je rekel, je samo stvar.
He said, "Whether it's good or bad for you, from a superconscious perspective, is not what you do, but how you do it."
Če je dobra ali slaba stvar zate iz nadzavestne perspektive, ni kaj delaš, ampak kako to delaš.
So if we find that it's very hard to feel from a higher perspective what we should do, perhaps we're asking the wrong question.
In če mislimo, da je zelo težko doumeti, ali je stvar dobra ali slaba, najbrž sprašujemo napačno vprašanje.
Or the right question could be, what am I afraid of?
Pravo vprašanje je verjetno, česa se bojim,
What am I holding on to?
česa se držim,
How can I grow?
kako lahko rastem.
And once we sort of learn to approach life more from the perspective of our higher self,
In ko se naučimo, kako pristopiti k življenju z vidika višjega sebe.
and this is very simple to say and very challenging to do.
In to je zelo preprosto reči, ampak zelo težko narediti.
But when we even just get the idea that this is what I'm here for,
Ampak ko dobimo samo idejo, to je to, zakaj sem tukaj.
we're very much helped these days by all these death and return experiences that people are having all over the world.
Danes nam pomaga zelo to, kar ljudje pravijo, ko že umrejo in potem jih oživijo.
From this perspective, they step out of this material world and they see it very differently.
Stopijo ven iz tega materialnega sveta v tistem trenutku in vidijo to povsem drugače.
And when they step back into it, they have a very, very different perspective.
In ko stopijo nazaj v ta svet, imajo zelo, zelo drugačno
I mean,
perspektivo.
this is what the scriptures have told us for ages, but it's nice to get it in plain language.
In to so nam stara učenja govorila že dolgo, dolgo časa, ampak je dobro to za nas slišati v preprostem jeziku.
One story that particularly moved me was very simple.
Ena zgodba, ki se me je zelo dotaknila, je zelo preprosta.
He was a young man, 21 years old when he died temporarily.
Mlad moški, 21 let, ko je začasno umrl,
He was very devoted to Jesus.
bil je zelo predan Jezusu.
So Jesus met him on the other side.
Jezus ga je srečal na drugi strani
And Jesus said one thing, "How much have you loved?"
in Jezus ga je vprašal, koliko si ljubil.
And the answer was not very much.
In odgovor je bil ne dosti.
And he tried to defend himself. "I'm just young. I haven't had much of a chance."
In se je hotel se braniti.
And Jesus just very calmly, "How much have you loved?"
Jezus ponovno zelo blago rekel, koliko si ljubil.
So when he was sent back into his body, he started all over
In ko je bil poslan nazaj v njegove telo, je začel vse od začetka.
because he wanted to answer that question a lot better the next time he met Jesus.
Želel je odgovoriti na to vprašanje zelo bolje, ko bo naslednjič srečal Jezus.
So we have to take the time to say, from Divine Mother's perspective, what really matters.
Zato si moramo vzeti čas, da se vprašamo iz vidika božanske matere, kaj je zares pomembno.
When I was very young on the spiritual path, very early on the spiritual path, still young on the spiritual path.
Ko sem bila mlada, zelo mlada sem bila, ko sem vstopila na to pot.
Somehow I had this very vivid feeling about what it was like to die.
Imela sem zelo resnično sliko tega, kako je, ko umreš.
Not a death experience by any means.
Ne izkušnjo smrti,
but more I could see my deathbed.
Ampak bolj videla sem svojo smrtno posteljo.
In imagination, not in vision.
V imaginaciji.
I'd never been at that time I'd never been with anyone who died.
V tistem času še nisem bila nikoli z nobenim, ki je umrl.
Since then I've had the opportunity to be there a number of times.
Od takrat sem bila prisotna že večkrat, ko se je zgodilo.
But my imagination when I was 18 was pretty accurate.
Ampak moja domišljija, ko sem bila 18, je bila zelo natančna.
But it was so clear to me that nothing of this world goes with you except your consciousness.
Ampak zelo jasno mi je bilo, da nič iz tega sveta ne gre s tabo, razen tvoja zavest.
And your consciousness you're still the same person. You just can walk through walls and it's like the movies. It's different.
In tvoja zavest je, da še vedno si ista oseba, ampak lahko hodiš čez zidove kot v filmih.
The way Swami put it, and he put it in this way, nothing happens when you die, he said.
In kot je rekel Swami, nič se ne zgodi, ko umreš.
Whatever you are, whatever you have become, that's all that goes with you.
Karkoli si postal, to gre vse s tabo.
And at that moment, all the stuff we worried about is not important.
In v tistem trenutku vse to, kar nas je skrbelo prej, ni pomembno.
You realize there was one thread, how much have you loved?
In spoznamo, da je samo ena nit, koliko si ljubil.
And it's not just how much have you, loved in the sense of I love you, you love me, I love you, you love me.
In ne v smislu tega, v neke ljubezni, ja, tebe ljubim, jaz tebe ljubim.
It's the love that St. John speaks about in the Bible.
Ljubezen, ko je sveti Janez govoril v Bibliji.
The phrase is, perfect love casts out all fear.
Fraza pravi, popolna ljubezen izžene v strah.
If we receive Divine Mother's perfect love and see everything that comes to us is coming from her,
če prejmemo ljubezen božanske matere in vidimo, da vse, kar dobimo, je od nje,
then we meet life heart first without any fear, because what do we have to fear if everything comes from her?
Potem gremo v življenje s srcem naprej, ker se nimamo ničesar bati.
And then it's easy to live by higher intuition, because what else would we want?
In potem je lahko živeti z višjo intuicijo, ker kaj drugega pa si želimo.
Okay. I would be very happy to take a few questions, if we have any questions. Yes, thank you for being the first.
I just wasn't completely sure when you were explaining your journey through the meditation of why is it difficult to get the answer or to know what God wants, and then you came to you don't want to know what He wants of you because you're afraid. And what are you afraid of? Were you afraid of knowing what He wants because you might not like it? I wasn't.
Okay, I'll finish the thought.
Torej, vprašanje je, zakaj te bi bilo strah? Ja, zakaj te bi bilo strah? Ker nočeš vedeti, kaj Bog hoče v tebi, ampak zakaj te je strah tega?
It was perfectly self-evident what was going to happen.
Povsem jasno je bilo, kaj se bo zgodilo takrat.
And it was perfectly self-evident that it was not going to make me happy.
In povsem je bilo jasno, da ne bom vesela.
In terms of the moment.
Glede tistega momenta.
That I was going to be sad.
Da bom žalostna.
And uncomfortable.
In neprijetno mi bo.
And I desperately did not want that to be the answer.
In res nisem želela, da bi bil to odgovor.
So all intuition, all evidence, I just rejected it.
In vso intuicijo, vse dokaze sem samo zavrnila.
And pretended that God was silent.
In se predstavljala, da je Bog, da je tiho.
Is, you know, when somebody talks to you and you don't want to hear, you go, oh, like that. Yeah. He was talking real clear to me and I was going like that.
Govoril mi je, jaz pa sem si...
Didn't like is a very mild phrase, yeah.
Reči, da si samo nisem želela odgovora, je preveč blago.
But the subconscious wants the momentum to continue, and
Podzavest hoče, da se ta momentum nadaljuje.
And I was very attached to things staying as they were. Yeah.
In zelo sem bila navezana na to.
So I found a way to hope for a different outcome.
Našla sem način, da sem upala na drugačen zaključek.
Big waste of time.
Veliko zapravljanje časa.
Because God had a plan and it was better than mine.
Ker Bog je imel plan in ta plan je bil boljši od mojega.
But that's perfect love casts out the fear.
Ampak to je perfektna ljubezen izgnana za strah.
It doesn't cast out the pain.
Ne izžene pa bolečine.
But also part of the fear is the fear of the pain.
Ampak tudi del strahu je strah pred bolečino.
I'm going to expand on that because it's an important point.
Bom razširila malo to misel.
For about 20 years, every year or every other year, I and some friends would take a group of Americans to India.
Za 20 let smo vsako leto jaz in moji prijatelji peljali skupino Američanov v Indijo.
On a pilgrimage related to Yogananda's life.
Na romanje po Yoganandinem življenju.
We started in 1986.
Začeli smo leta 86.
And India was just at the beginning of the enormous economic changes that have happened since.
Indija je bila ravno na začetku velikih ekonomskih sprememb.
And most of the Americans that we took had never been out of what you would call the Western world, the developed world.
In večina Američanov, ki je šlo z nami, ni bilo nikoli ven iz razvitega sveta.
So we encountered a lot of situations that we'd never been in before.
Srečali smo, naleteli na veliko situacij, katerih nismo poznali.
Beggars, disease, deformed people, families living on the street.
Brezdomci, bolezni, deformirani ljudje, družine na ulici.
And India at that time, there was no middle sphere, so you either stayed in hotels that were unsuitable from the American point of view, or you stayed in these 5-star luxury hotels.
In v Indiji takrat ni bilo neka srednjega sloja, bilo so samo hoteli, ki so bili luknje ali pa luxury 5 zvezdic hoteli.
Which unfortunately awakened in me a great pleasure in 5-star luxury hotels.
Kar nažalost je v meni prebudilo veliko ljubezen do 5 zvezdičnih hotelov.
But from the luxury hotel in Calcutta, for the week that we were there, we could watch the families on the sidewalk.
Ampak iz luksuznega hotela v Kalkuti smo lahko gledali na ulico, na družine, ki so živele na ulici.
And the beggars were very smart. They waited right outside the hotel.
In brezdomci, prosjači so čakali pred hotelom.
So you had to run the gauntlet to get back into your 5-star hotel.
Zato si mogel teči, da si prišel nazaj v hotel.
And I observed that our American group, some people totally freaked out, just were hysterical about what they were seeing.
Naši Američani tam nekateri so popolnoma bili paranoični.
And others were kind of casual. They would chat with the beggars, they would talk to the family on the street.
Ostali so bili samo tako, malo so kričali na brezdomce, pogovarjali se z družinami na ulicami.
And my primary job on that was to keep people emotionally happy and balanced.
In moja glavna naloga na tistem potovanju je bila, da sem ljudi ohranjala vesele in uravnane.
And I began to understand the pattern.
In na to sem začela razumeti vzorec.
People who had come to understand that suffering is a great teacher.
Ljudje, ki so doumeli, da je bolečina in trpljenje velik učitelj.
And either they learned it in other lives or they'd been through it in this incarnation.
Ali so se to naučili v prejšnjih življenjih, ali pa so že v tem življenju to izkusili.
What starts out as the worst often is the making of you.
To, kar se ponavadi začne kot najhujše, je ponavadi tisto, kar nas naredi.
So challenging circumstances may not be any fun, but in the end, you're grateful for them.
Težke situacije ne bodo zabavne, ampak na koncu si hvaležen za njih.
In other words, if you were at peace within yourself of the positive necessity for suffering in order to learn,
Če je v tebi mir za nujo trpljenja, da se naučiš,
you could observe suffering in others and still be overwhelmed with compassion.
lahko opazuješ trpljenje v drugim in še vedno si poln ljubezni, empatije do njih.
But it didn't frighten you in the same way.
Ampak te ne prestraši to.
And that was how I began to work with people. What are you afraid of?
In tako sem začela delati z ljudmi. Kaj je tebe strah?
You hear a theme here. Fear is the opposite of love.
Strah je nasprotje ljubezni.
And fear completely confuses our capacity to perceive what is true.
Strah nas popolnoma zmede pri temu, da lahko dojamemo, kaj je res.
Okay. Good question. Thank you for asking. Oh, good. Well, then we're a pair. I like your question. You like my answer. We're a team. Yes. Uh-huh.
So what do you think about abortion?
Oh.
Do you think that this is a fear from life?
If fear, you mean the fear of giving birth to a child that you can't take care of? Is that what you mean? Or?
No. The abortion and the sacred life.
Oh, I see. Whoa.
Torej,
Okay.
vprašanje je glede splava, ali je to...
The question is about abortion and just about abortion. We can leave it there. I'll answer. Yogananda says that life begins at conception.
Yogananda pravi, da se življenje začne pri spočetju.
I can't say one way or another, so I repeat what he says. I'm more inclined to believe him than to believe my own ideas.
Jaz ne vem, kaj reči, zato pravim, kaj je on rekel in bolj verjamem njemu kot svojim idejam.
So from the beginning, there's two of us involved.
Torej, od vsega
Or three.
začetka sva že dva,
More accurately, three.
oziroma trije.
I've always, full disclosure, I won't counsel someone about whether or not to have an abortion.
Če sem popolnoma, da povem po resnici, ne bom svetovala nekomu, ali naj ima ali naj nima splava.
I just can't.
Ne morem.
And it's not because I'm some fundamental, strict person. I don't know what my own past... I've never in this life been pregnant, so it's never been an issue.
Ne zato, ker bi bila neka zelo stroga, fundamentalna oseba, ampak zato, ker pač ne vem, kaj je moje mnenje glede tega. Nikoli nisem bila noseča in...
But it's just very sensitive, incredibly sensitive issue in
ampak
my
je
heart.
zelo občutljiva zadeva v mojem srcu.
Many women that I know have had abortions.
Poznam mnogo žensk, katerih je imelo splav.
People who are now devotees, now Kriyabans, after they became disciples in Kriyabans, they still had abortions.
Ljudi, ki so privrženci, ki so kriyabani, mnogo njih je imelo splav po temu, ko so že bili to.
So I have no judgment about people doing it.
Nimam nobene sodbe, mnenja, grdega mnenja glede tega, da delajo to ljudje.
But
Žensk.
it's a very unfortunate circumstance in our culture that
Ampak je zelo neprijetna, oziroma nažalost taka situacija v naši kulturi,
there's so much chaos on so many issues.
da je toliko kaosa glede toliko teh težav.
Now the other side of that is the mother is making a decision, but the child also is a participant in that.
Druga stran tega je, da mati se odloča, ampak tudi otrok je del te odločitve.
People have sexual intercourse a lot more often than they get pregnant.
Ljudje imajo spolne odnose precej bolj pogosto, kot nekdo rata noseč.
So we all know that babies come from sex, but not all sex produces babies.
Vsi vemo, da otroci pridejo iz seksa, ampak ne v seks povzroči otroke,
Because somebody else is involved.
ker je nekdo drug vključen.
While I'm saying this, Yogananda actually made this statement.
In to je rekel Yogananda.
Sometimes when a soul wants to be born to a man and woman,
Včasih, ko se duša želi roditi moškemu in ženski,
that soul will project into the room erotic thoughts.
bo ta duša projektirala v sobo erotične misli.
And will persuade you to give him or her a chance to get into the womb.
Prepričala bo njo ali njega, da pride v maternico.
So there's more people participating.
Veliko ljudi je vključenih v to.
And Master said something, let me think how it goes. You know, sometimes a child that wants to be born but can't be born because the mother or the parents are not able to bring that child to life, into independent life.
Včasih, ko se duša želi roditi, ampak ne more, ker njegovi starši ga ne morejo prinesti v neodvisno življenje.
Because in one way or another that child did not respect the privilege of human life in past incarnations.
Na nek način ali drug ta otrok ni spoštoval privilegija človeškega življenja v prejšnjih inkarnacijah.
And now they have to have that desire thwarted until they really come to appreciate what a privilege it is to have a human body.
In zdaj jih bo ta njihova želja, jih bo...
Another reason can be that there's some kind of a lesson that the would-be mother needs to learn, and the child who comes is there to help you learn that lesson.
Včasih je to lahko samo lekcija za potencialno mati in pride ta otrok, ta duša v to, da jo pomaga naučiti o to lekcijo.
So the mother can be serving the child's karma, the child can be serving the mother's karma.
Otrok lahko služi karmi matere ali pa mater služi karmi otroka.
Because just because it's a baby, it's a full-grown soul.
Samo zato, ker je otrok, še vedno je popolnoma razvita duša.
The full consciousness, the full intelligence, the full karma is present.
Popolna duša, popolna zavest, popolna karma je prisotna.
Just the material world requires that baby be small and then grow up.
Samo materialni svet zahteva, da je otrok majhen in na to odraste.
And the other thing we have to learn is that no action is permanent.
In nekaj, kar si mora zapomniti, je, da nobeno dejanje ni stalno, ni večno.
We are just a pattern of energy.
Smo samo vzorec energije.
And when, you know, an abortion is an act that a female body, the mind of the female body can make a decision, but it's all related to being in the physical body.
In splav je odločitev, ki jo sprejme ženska v materialnem telesu, ampak to je samo na materialni ravni.
So you can stop the growth of that physical body, but the soul simply exits from the womb because the body's not viable, but the consciousness is still untouched. It's not harmed by abortion.
In lahko samo ustaviš rast fizičnega telesa otroka, ampak duša gre naprej.
And the same for the mother. Whatever the decision was, it becomes, it's a physical thing and therefore it's temporary.
In tudi karkoli je bilo z materjo, je samo ena to fizična zadeva, fizična odločitev, zato je samo to začasna situacija.
But the energy pattern that experience imprints on you then becomes part of who you are.
Ampak energijski vzorec, ki ga ta izkušnja da vate, to je tisto, kar potem ostane.
Either acceptance or guilt or shame or pride or whatever it is, that's what you keep, is the vibration that the experience left you with.
Ali te to pusti z sprejetjem tega, z sramoto, z krivdo, to je tisto, kar ti ostane.
And every decision we ever make in life, it seems like a good idea at the time or we wouldn't make it.
In vsaka odločitev, ki jo sprejmemo, moramo vedeti, da se je zdela dobra odločitev v trenutku, drugače ne bi sprejeli.
And whatever action we take is transitory.
In kakršnokoli akcijo vzamemo, naredimo, je samo prehodna.
And if, for example, you decide it was a mistake, a person decides it's a mistake,
In če se odločimo, da je bila to napaka,
well, it's a mistake and now it's done and everybody goes on.
naj bo to samo napaka in se zdaj konec in gremo dalje.
But if we have a complex about it, that
Ampak,
complex stays with us because that's the energy pattern that we've created.
ampak če imamo pa kompleks glede tega, ta kompleks ostane z nami, ker smo ustvarili vzorec energije.
One of my friends who had an abortion,
Ena od mojih prijateljic, ki je imela splav,
when she was much younger than when I knew her,
ko je bila mnogo mlajša,
she was tortured by having made that decision.
je bila mučena, sama sebe mučila zaradi te odločitve.
And finally she brought the issue to Swami Kriyananda.
In končno je prišla s te težavo do Svamija.
And he said to her, "Oh, that soul, it's long since been incarnated in someone else."
In je rekel, ta duša je bila že dolgo nazaj ponovno inkarnirana nekje drugje.
In her mind, you know, this poor soul never got to have a life.
V tvojem umu si misliš, ta boga duša nikoli ne bo imela življenja.
And she just carried that burden all the time.
In je to breme nosila cel čas v sebi.
And that's why Swami responded to her, "Oh, the person's long since having their life."
In zato je Svami tako reagiral, da je ta njeno breme.
But she was still carrying this terrible complex.
Ampak še vedno je pa nosila ta grozen kompleks.
Now, she could say, "I'll never do that again because it doesn't work for me to do that."
Takrat je lahko rekla, da ne bo nikoli več naredila tega, ker pač preprosto ne deluje za njo, da to naredi.
And that's something that's worth learning, or to say, "I could never have raised that child, it was the right decision."
In to je nekaj, kar se je vredno naučiti, ker lahko bi rekla, nikoli ne bi mogla vzgajati tistega otroka.
So it's very complicated.
Zelo komplicirano.
And people have also, the same decision can have many motivations.
Ena odločitev ima lahko mnogo različnih motivacij.
It can be an act of pure love. I cannot raise this child.
Lahko je dejanje popolne ljubezni, ne moremo vzgajati tega otroka.
Or it can be an act of, well, I can't go out dancing anymore and drinking on the weekends if I have a baby.
Lahko pa je dejanje popolnoma, ne morem več iti ven plesati in se zabavati na vikende.
So Divine Mother knows our hearts.
Božanska mati pozna naša srca.
And to become judgmental and dogmatic about these things is not a good idea.
In da postanemo dogmatični in sodimo te stvari, ni pravi dostop.
I don't think it's a healthy society where abortion is birth control.
Mislim, da ni zdrava družba, kjer je splav so kontracepcijske tablete.
So I have to honestly say that.
To moram iskreno povedati.
But there's so many other things that are out of balance in our society, I can't just pull one little piece out of it.
Ampak toliko drugih stvari je narobe v naši družbi, da to ni stvar, ki bi jo izločila ven iz tega.
So that's basically what I would say. I never talk about it because I never know who's in the room.
Ja,
You know?
nikoli ne rada govorim o tem, ker ne vem, kdo je v sobi.
I try also to be very careful about child abuse and sexual molestations because you never know who's in the room.
In vedno sem zelo previdna glede kakšnih spolnih zlorab in drugih stvari, ker ne vem, kdo je v sobi.
And Divine Mother loves us. She knows that we're weak. She knows that we have lots to learn.
Božanska mati nas ima rada, ve, da se imamo še veliko za naučiti.
And to me, that's more important than anything.
In zame je to najbolj pomembno kot.
There is one last thought. You know, abortion is a specific action. But the question is, what does it bring out of me?
Splav je specifično dejanje, ampak vprašanje je, kaj prinese ven iz mene, kaj se zgodi.
Why, if this is a woman with this decision or a man losing his child, because we don't talk enough about the fathers in this conversation.
Ne govorimo dosti o očetih v tem pogovoru.
It goes through a woman's body, but it's a man's child.
Gre čez žensko telo, ampak je tudi moški otrok.
That's why I say there's so many things that are out of balance that it's hard to pick it up just from one thread and be able to talk.
Zato pravim, da je toliko stvari ven iz ravnovesja, da je težko vzeti eno stvar.
But events are significant in terms of what why did this karma come to me? What is it that I'm supposed to learn? That's the question that we have to ask.
Ampak te dogodki so pomembni, ker se lahko vprašam, zakaj je ta karma prišla do mene, kaj se lahko naučim iz tega.
And we can't communicate in words with the soul that's in the womb.
In ne moremo se pogovarjati z besedami za dušo, ki je v naši maternici.
But that soul is not there by accident either.
Ampak ta duša tudi ni tam po nesreči.
Okay. Do we have an easier question? Good night. Okay. Yes. Uh-huh.
So I would go back to the intuition and
Okay.
part. My question would be, what would be the easiest way to distinguish between intuition and fear itself?
Right. Well, the question is, how do you distinguish between intuition and fear?
Kako razlikovati med intuicijo in strahom?
There's the question, how do you get good judgment?
Vprašanje, kako dobiš dobro mnenje
By having bad judgment.
z imajetim slabim mnenje.
Meaning, pay attention to your experience.
Bodi pazljiv na svoje izkušnje.
And don't be afraid to just sail out there and see what happens.
In naj te ne bo strah, da pač pojdi ven in vidi, kaj se bo zgodilo.
If we're too afraid to experiment, we really never learn anything.
Če nas je preveč strah eksperimentirati, se nikoli zares ne naučimo ničesar.
But don't throw yourself off of the top of the building.
Ampak ne se pa vršti dol stavbe.
Take one step at a time
En korak za drugim.
and look around you and see what's happening.
In pogledaj okrog sebe in vidi, kaj se dogaja.
Yeah, and then everything can be turned around.
In na to se lahko vse spremeni.
And intuition is really odd because on one hand you could say, well, see if the universe supports your intuition.
Intuicija je zelo nenavadna, ker na eni strani lahko rečeš, no, da vidimo, če vesolje podpira tvojo intuicijo.
Or see if you get a lot of opposition to your intuition.
Ali vidi, če dobiš dosti nestrinjanja s tvojo intuicijo.
But sometimes the more people oppose you, the more you know you're right.
Ampak včasih več ljudi, ko se ne strinja s tabo, bolj veš, da imaš prav.
And sometimes when everybody opposes you, it's a really good sign that you're wrong.
In včasih, ko se vsi ne strinjajo s tabo, je zelo dober znak, da res nimaš prav.
Because it's an internal reality.
Ker je to notranja realnost.
I speak from experience when I say you just have to try, keep trying.
Z izkušenj govorim, ko pravim, da moraš samo poskušati in vedno poskušati.
And then very gradually you begin to see a pattern.
In počasi vidiš vzorec v tem.
That there's just the way I put it is, it comes in a certain way.
Pride do tebe v točno določenem načinu.
And when it comes in that way, you just know it's true.
In ko pride v tem načinu, veš, da je to resnica.
But it's a fine line.
Ampak je tanka linija.
And often there's a moment when you know you're wrong, but you don't listen. You don't want to know. Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Pride moment, ko veš, da nimaš prav in nočeš poslušati, kar nočeš vedeti.
I was doing something very controversial within Ananda at one point.
Nekaj časa sem delal nekaj zelo kontroverznega v Anandi.
And it got so controversial that I finally had to call Swamiji and I said, sir, should I not do this?
In je postalo enkrat tako kontroverzno, da sem poklicala Swamija Kriyanando in ga vprašala, če neham delati to.
And he presented all the reasons why he thought maybe it wasn't a great idea.
In mi je predstavil vse razloge, zakaj je mislil, da to res ni dobra ideja, kar delam.
I said, but sir, and this is what I said, but sir, I don't think any of your concerns are going to happen because the idea came to me and I just said, in that way.
Ampak, gospod, mislim, da nobena izmed vaših teh razlogov se ne bo zgodilo, ker
and then he said, oh, then of course you have to do it.
Potem je rekel, seveda moraš narediti to.
Because when it comes to you, when you get to know this in that way, you just have to have the courage to go.
Ker ko pride do tebe v tem smislu, da veš, da je res, potem moraš zbrati pogum in narediti.
And I had to make certain promises to him that if things really went sour, that I would just stop.
Ampak mogla sem obljubiti, da če grejo res narobe stvari, da se bom ustavila.
But I knew they wouldn't, and they didn't.
Ampak sem vedela, da se ne bo in se ni.
Now, bear in mind that things coming to me in that way, where I just have no doubts, it doesn't happen very often.
Ampak pomni, da te zadeve, ki pridejo tako do tebe, da res nimaš nobenega dvoma, je zelo, zelo redko.
A lot of what I do, though, I do just because I know we should do it.
Včasih mnogo tega, kar delam, je, ker pač mislim, da vem, da moramo to delati.
But there's no big bells and whistles and stars and saints appearing, you know.
Ampak se ne pojavljajo svetniki, da mi to govorijo.
It just seems we ought to do it, so we do.
Samo zdi se mi, da moramo to narediti in to naredimo.
We're acting from intuition a whole lot more than we know.
Delamo iz intuicije dejanja mnogo bolj, kot mislimo.
Yeah, and gradually you just figure it out. If it's important to you and you work on it, you get better like anything else. Like her playing the violin so beautifully. How many hours of practice? How many wrong notes? Don't tell us, because we all would be horrified. Yeah. Go ahead.
I think this is the issue because, I mean, I can't say that everyone is doing this, but I know I am. We think intuition is going to save us from pain and from negative experiences,
Yes.
but in fact, from my understanding, as I understood what you were just saying, intuition doesn't mean avoiding pain.
Absolutely. Yes, yeah.
It means understand what can happen, what is maybe about to happen, and accept it.
It's about expansion of consciousness.
Intuicija je glede razširjanja zavesti.
And expanding consciousness sounds like a good idea until it starts happening.
In razširjanje zavesti se sliši kot dobra ideja, dokler se ne začne dogajati.
Because preference for the known misery is really, the known misery. I'm miserable, but at least it's familiar. And I really don't know what's going to happen over there.
Ker preferenca do znane mizerije je zelo znana in je zelo radi ostanemo v njej.
Yeah, precisely. Well, perhaps we've offered as much as we can this evening.
A little more instrumental music. This is by Swami Kriyananda called Sailing the Blue Seas. Think of it as following your intuition.